Hi everybody!
When Sega initially showed off Vice, Ica, and Fina in Valkyria Chronicles all the way back in 2008, it gave fans of the turn-based JRPG from 2000 hope there might be a return to the IP Skies of Arcadia. 16 years later, that still has yet to happen, but the demand for Skies of Arcadia remains. Recently, fans of Sega have had far more hope regarding Skies of Arcadia coming back thanks to Sega announcing at the Game Awards they want to bring back the feeling of the Dreamcast era, but for the modern age. Given fans are demanding this IP return, and the fact it was literally a Dreamcast exclusive at least until 02 when it was ported over to the Nintendo GameCube, it makes a lot of sense for Skies of Arcadia to come back. Now, a lot of people will say just emulate it, it's easy enough. But the thing is, not everyone wants to do that, either because they don't want to hunt down a physical copy, which is very expensive, and then rip the files, or because of the legally dubious area emulation happens to fall under. I'd personally love to see Sega do a ground-up remake of Skies of Arcadia, as I've never gotten a chance to experience it, and from what I've read, it's a beloved game, and for good reason. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say turn-based combat is dead. Why should we give a shit about a now 24-year-old game that, for all intents and purposes, flopped? You have to remember, things were very different back in the early 2000s. Sega was no longer the powerhouse it was in the early 90s. A lot of hardware Sega produced in the mid-90s flopped, causing the company to hemorrhage money. It was to the point the company almost went bankrupt. So that meant a poor marketing budget for titles. Plus, by the early 2000s, despite being very popular, turn-based JRPGs were on a bit of a decline because the market had become oversaturated with them, especially on the PS1. Plus, the Dreamcast was a really expensive machine. Its launch price was just shy of $200 USD, which would be about $350 USD in modern times. That might not seem like a lot now, but it was back then. Then once Sega left the console market, it entered into a partnership with the other console manufacturers, with Nintendo benefiting the most from it. However, Skies of Arcadia was a really ill-fitting title for the GameCube, especially when you consider how much Nintendo fans hated Sega games back then. That's just how intense the console wars were between Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. It was pretty much a death sentence releasing it on that hardware, even though the GameCube was far more powerful than the PlayStation 2. It actually would have made a lot more sense to release it on the PS2, hindsight being 2020, since it would have likely flopped even harder had it released on the original Xbox. Microsoft and other companies have tried to make Japanese games a thing on that console, but they have never been very popular for whatever reason. The target demographic on those platforms have always loved shooters of various descriptions, whereas Sony fans tend to enjoy Japanese games more. For that reason, it would have made more sense for Sega to release Skies of Arcadia on the PS2, even if that would have meant more compromises in the graphics or in other areas. The PS2, despite being a good console, was not a massive powerhouse, even in its day. It was merely a competent console. But those factors contributed massively to why Skies of Arcadia flopped as hard as it did. There are likely other factors, but these were the ones that were most obvious to me. Like I said, gaming was a very different beast in the 90s and noughties. Back then, JRPGs, especially turn-based ones, were a dime a dozen. We had some of the most iconic and beloved games in the genre releasing during that time period, especially from juggernauts like Squaresoft, later renamed Square Enix, and a plethora of other companies. This oversaturation meant a lot of amazing games just never found their audience and became hidden gems. Skies of Arcadia is one of those. However, given we have fewer JRPGs of this style, with Trails and Persona being the cream of the turn-based crop, this means a ground-up remake or even just a simple remaster for Skies of Arcadia would finally give this game the chance it deserved from the outset. At this point, I'd say it would sell at minimum 2 million copies, even if it is a rather niche title. It would sell so well thanks to word of mouth. Given the original was a solid experience and has gained notoriety as a hidden gem, people who have played it previously would buy it again. People like me, who have heard about it thanks to the Valkyria Chronicles fandom, would buy it as well. Then there would be the general weeb audience who'd buy it just because anime aesthetics. Then when you factor in hardcore JRPG fans, you'd see the game has the chance of reaching the broader audience it deserved all the way back in the noughties. Plus, if it were a ground-up remake, Sega could really push the envelope of the technology they have. Just look at how beautiful the last few Yakuza titles have been. Plus, look at what Sega have done with the Canvas engine used for the Valkyria games. They're still stunning to look at just because of their strong aesthetics, even if the graphics are not the most technically stunning. Or even look at what Atlus are doing with Persona and Metaphor ReFantazio. Those games also look top-notch. By doing a potential Skies of Arcadia remake, Sega really opens the doors for what they could do in the future. They could do something similar to the RE engine, which has evolved into the Rex engine. Capcom intends on licensing that engine out to other studios going forward. By doing that, Sega would be able to keep the costs of future projects down while also making a tidy profit from any company that licenses out their new engine, at least if they go with the in-house option. More than likely, Sega would opt to use a third-party one like Unreal Engine 5 or something similar. I mentioned Atlus earlier. They're an in-house studio for Sega at this point, as they're outright owned by Sega. Plus, they have RGG Studio, who made Yakuza Like a Dragon and will release Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth in just a few weeks. Not only are those games amazing to look at, they're turn-based games that play well. Beyond Nihon Falcom, I'd say it's safe to say Sega have developers who know how to get the most from turn-based combat. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Turn-based combat isn't dying or dead. It's like any other type of game. It just needs a developer who actually knows what they're doing. A developer that has no clue how to make a game of a given type is more than likely doomed to fail, even if they have a large number of resources at their disposal. Since Skies of Arcadia is from a simpler time, the team could keep it relatively simple with a ground-up remake, which is what a lot of Square Enix fans wanted with the Final Fantasy VII Remake titles. They wanted the original combat they loved with a modern coat of paint. Don't get me wrong, I do like Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's just a case of I don't love it. The reason I don't love it is simple. It's not the combat system I wanted. I know someone's going to come at me in the comments section wanting to roast me. Go ahead. This is a hill I'm going to die on. Don't get me wrong, I still like the game, and I do love action RPGs. But part of why Final Fantasy VII is so beloved in its original configuration is because of the combat it had. If Sega wishes to keep the original Skies of Arcadia fans happy, should this remake ever happen, they'll need to keep the original combat intact, merely adding some quality of life improvements that fans of modern turn-based JRPGs demand. Those quality of life improvements would mostly be things like turbo mode, and various other smaller things that, while not totally a requirement, just improve the overall experience. If you look at the surveys Sega sends out every once in a while and follow up with the results, you'll notice Skies of Arcadia is one of the most requested games for Sega to bring back. As far back as 2010, there were rumors circulating Sega was going to make an HD port for Skies of Arcadia on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. They even went as far as renewing the trademark on the franchise. However, nothing materialized. Also in 2020, Kenji Hiruta, whose name I likely just butchered, stated he was interested in returning to the series. So clearly people at Sega still love the property, which is a good sign, even if it hasn't managed to bear fruit yet. Sega is always at its best when it's being a maverick or a trailblazer. Most of the time, this is to the company's benefit, with a few exceptions. This new era of Sega feels different. It feels like Sega actually give a crap about their legacy IPs, as we're getting some real deep cuts. Just how deep those cuts go will be explored in a future video. With this new direction, Sega can easily bring back Skies of Arcadia. While it might not seem the most logical choice at first glance, it is a title that would likely do extremely well for them, and it would fit the more maverick direction the company seems willing to head in, which is a great thing for Sega fans new and old. If you've liked this video, consider hitting the like button. It really does help out the channel, as do subscriptions. I'm currently on the road to 1,000 subscribers, and I would love to hit that by the end of 2024. Also, if you want to help the channel out further, you can join as a channel member. You'll get exclusive perks such as shoutouts at the end of every video, which is what we're going to do now. Thanks go out to my current channel members, R. Campbell and Danny Boy. 2 of my previous videos will be popping up on screen now. One is a video YouTube thinks you'll enjoy, and the other is my list of studios Sony should look into acquiring. Spoiler alert, Sega is one of them. Until next time, keep blazing that trail.